In today's episode of our photography review show, we're going to be reviewing images from 28 photographers. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub. I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England, and here we are with another episode of this great show which has been really popular over the last few months. We've been receiving lots of images, and this is the reason why we had to basically go ahead and limit the number of the photos to 1 or 2 per photographer, and also that's why we usually divide the show between 2 or 3 different parts. We usually look at the landscape photographers first, and then we look at the mixed team photographers and the rest of the photography categories in another 1 or 2 parts. You can always find them on our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to right now. Also, as always, we want to ask you to make sure that you like, comment and follow this channel so we can keep creating content like this. Now, before we're gonna jump into the reviews, I wanted to remind you about our new photography group. If you head to Facebook and search for Clever Photographer Academy, it's a group where we talk all things photography. We do photography competitions, we review your photos throughout the week, we answer your photography questions, and we have even more photography fun there. So make sure you head to Facebook and join us there. But now, without any further ado, let's jump straight into the reviewing. And here we are back in the Lightroom. Once again, we're going to be looking at landscape photographers right now in this first part of the show. We have 15 photographers to look at and lots of photos to review. So let's jump straight into it. So right now we're looking at pictures from Bob, and I have 2 images here. So as always, let's have a look at the first impression. First of all, on this one, I love the long exposure. I think it's looking great. A little bit of a shame of the light, creating kind of deep shadows, but as technique goes, for the long exposure, I think it's great. On this one, stunning focal point right here with a lovely kind of balance on each side. Interesting sky with some textures on it. So let's jump straight into the reviewing. So let's have a look if we have any details of the image, and we do. So looking at the first one, obviously using a Sony camera, ISO 100, 35mm, f/18, 15-second exposure. So I'm wondering if you were using ND filter in this kind of condition. Either way, it's the kind of super long exposure, which I am a big fan of. So I think it looks really cool. And when it comes to the technical point of view, let's have a look. So I think it's sharp all the way through. I'm seeing lots of noise, which is kind of interesting. Knowing that you're using ISO 100, there shouldn't be as much noise as we see, specifically in the kind of darker areas of the image. Also, when you look a little bit further, you can see that some parts are just a touch blurry, so something to kind of look at. I wonder what was it you were focusing on. With the long exposure, it's always good to kind of make sure that you're focusing with the one central point, which you point towards one of the kind of bigger elements on the image, something like this here and here. With f/18, you shouldn't really have an issue with the depth of the field or any kind of depth of field blur. So really, next time, just kind of pick one point, focus on it, make sure that it's sharp, because looking a little bit closer, they are just a little touch blurry, but that's fine. So that's one thing. And the second thing is the noise. Again, specifically when I'm looking into the darker areas. Also, when I look into darker areas like here and here, I'm starting to see a little bit of chromatic aberration. So something again to kind of look at. So that's from the technical point. Otherwise, it's great. Very well done. Again, just my one note would be for the light. As you can see, you're getting kind of really kind of exposed areas here and here, which are almost on the edge of being overexposed. Let's have a look at your histogram, and let's have a look at your whites. As you can see, when I go into the actual editing and I look at the light and I click on whites and I hold Option or Alt on your computer, when I do that, you can see everything what's not black, it's overexposed, and basically the data in that areas of the image are lost now. So just something to keep an eye on for the future when it comes to the technical part of the image. Talking about this one, let's have a look if we have details on this one. There are no details here, although the mountain look really stunning. Let's zoom in a little bit. although it's sharp, I see lots of kind of, it almost look like a painting. I don't know if you were working on some kind of blur removal or whatever, created this really kind of almost texturized landscape. You can't really see that much when you're looking at the whole scene, but once you zoom in, you can see that you kind of lost sharpness. And again, it really looks like it was created rather on computer than captured on camera. So something to keep an eye on for the future. The light is very, very interesting, kind of hitting the mountain from one side. The sky, either it's been there or not, although I see a little bit of artifacts here. And that's it there mostly, maybe here a little bit as well. So I'm not sure if it was there or if you add it later, which is not a big deal. I just think that it's something to kind of keep an eye on. But other than that, the exposure seems to be fine. Again, if we go into our whites, you see when now I hit the whites, there are no points on the screen, means that everything is exposed well. And I think otherwise it looks quite all right. There is no noise, or at least you can't see it in this part of the photos, and it's fine. Talking about composition, this I really like. I think it kind of using these stones create quite nice depth of field, which kind of guide you through. The really nice white streak always work really well. It creates kind of atmospheric look, which is very, very lovely and pleasing for an eye. I wouldn't really add anything to it. Obviously, if you could have kind of moved around and maybe fill the foreground with another stone or something, that would be more for kind of next time, keeping an eye on your foreground elements, which are always the most trickiest to find and add to the scene. But again, something to kind of look at. Composition wise, there's nothing wrong with this one. With this one, we have a really strong focal point here. We're getting some foreground with this one. I think the scene is a little bit unbalanced as you get more on this. When we're talking about balance, we're talking about the kind of visual balance. If you would take the picture and put it on a kind of scale, you would want it to really kind of stay on one side, and it's kind of leaning towards this one as there is more darker areas. So let's see if we would have actually just crop it a little bit. And if you would have done something like this, the composition is much more cleaner and balanced. Everything is kind of pointing towards the main point on the picture. So that's just for the next time. The main reason why this doesn't work is because these are all brighter areas and the darker areas kind of overweight the balance of the image. You could have gone the other way around and maybe place the actual mountain on your kind of lower third. Maybe cropping a little bit of the sky, because the sky is quite nice, but to be honest, it doesn't add that much to the scene. So you could have gone for something like this and go more for panoramic view. And because we got reduced of some of the darkness, suddenly the scene's becoming much more balanced again. Again, when it comes to the crop, you could have gone for like 16 or 19 and really work with, you're talking about like a wide panoramic view, which is also looking great like this. Finally, to finish it off on post-processing, I think this is very nice. I think you're leaning a little bit towards green and green tint. So let's have a look at your color and let's have a look at your white balance if we would go for auto. And you can see how it pushes the purple all the way up to bring a little bit of the nature colors back. This is basically, it happens normally, but even more so when you do the long exposure. The camera keep looking at these big areas of green for quite some time, and it interprets and start to add green tint in other areas of the image. It happens a lot. It happens a lot with the blue skies as well. When you're taking a picture where there is a large amount of blue sky, lots of the shadows and other areas started to get the blue tint. So similarly here, another way to kind of work with it is to use this picker. And sometimes when you kind of pick in the more water parts, so something like this, you can find something what is more closer to the nature, and then again just adjust it on the actual sliders here. So that's about it on this one. Yeah, I would keep an eye on the noise again. There is something you can do in details and see if maybe a little bit of noise reduction wouldn't help. I never really go more than 30 because then it start to kind of lose the details on the image. Let's see where are the kind of really busy areas. You can see lots of it here and here. If I switch it on and off, you can see this was the good part. So before and after. It does remove a little bit of it. There is not much of a color noise, to be honest, so we don't have to play around that. We can add some sharpness back by using this slider and then just masking it off, making sure that basically we sharpening only the edges of the items. And that's about it on this one. On this one, most importantly, I would focus on the actual cropping. I wouldn't worry too much about anything else. I think the rest of the editing is nice. I think you're getting a little bit of a blue in your sky, in your snow on the mountains, which is quite natural. I mean, you could again use the picker and maybe click on some of the snow and see. So this would be the right color. So you could either do it just locally, the adjustment maybe using a brush or one of the masking tools, and work around with it. The rest of it is fine. If you do some changes or removals, just keep an eye on these artifacts to make sure that they're not visible there. Bob, thank you very much for sending us your images. They were great. I love to look at them. I love to review them. I think you're doing super well. The technique is there. Just kind of keep shooting, keep doing your thing, and make sure you send us more pictures in the future. We would love to see them. Moving on, the next photographer, Bradford. Bradford, we have 2 images from you, so let's jump straight into them. First impression, this one I absolutely love. Although usually I'm trying to stay away from the high frequency foreground, I think in this case it really works. It's almost like a scene from a fantasy movie. The tunnel you created, which kind of really takes you through the scene, I think it really works here. On this one, I think it's a shame that we are really tilted towards one side. You have some kind of, this is not even a sensor, that this is probably dust on your lens, and they almost look like oily patches. Now, I can share with you a video in the description on how some of it can be removed. Some of it needs to be removed in Photoshop and takes a little bit more time. So between the two, I love this one. This one would need a little bit of love, so we can talk about it in a second. So talking about technical point of view on this image, let's have a look if we have any details. You're using Canon, the settings 100 ISO, which is perfect, 33mm f5. For a scene like this, I understand that you were trying to keep the shutter speed high. Definitely, I mean, when it's gonna get darker like this, look for a tripod so you can set it up, and then you don't need to worry about the shutter speed, and you're more focusing on your f-stop and ISO 100. For a scene like this, I would be more looking for f11 to make sure that everything is sharp, and then I can work with it in post-processing rather than on a scene itself. You can see in the foreground you're starting to lose some of the details, but it's not the big deal again, because the main focus is here, the warm, brighter areas, and I think it really works here. Now, when we talk about technical point, you have really heavy, how we call it? 1 second. Optics, chromatic aberration, that's where the mind just goes. So you have a really heavy example of it here. Let's see if we could get reduced at least of some of it. And sometimes when it gets so heavy like this, even the Lightroom doesn't fix it. Now, there is a way to do it in Photoshop, and maybe in my next videos, I will show you how. You can also Google it and see how it can be done, but it's really heavily visible. Obviously, you have this natural scene, and this green just doesn't belong there. So that's another thing. I think you have it well exposed. I think that works. I think you're getting fair bit of a noise, which is my question. You can see more of the chromatic aberration here and here on the trees, but other than that, I think it's working. So tripod would be one thing. Keep an eye on the chromatic aberration, which, looking at your next photo and also the edges here, it's probably created by one of your lenses, and that's about it for the technical review. On this one, when it comes to technical point of view, definitely keep an eye on your lens and sensor dust. There is more of it here. If we go into the removal, which can be healed, visualize spots, let's see, they don't even show, which is quite interesting, but that's because they are not sensor dust, they are more a lens kind of. This can be like as simple as fingerprint. I see a lot of noise, so let's have a look at your setup. You see when I kind of zoom in how much noise is in the sky, in the foreground. You had an ISO 400, f5.6, 1/100 of a second. Again, I think you're shooting with a low f-stop for a scenes where you don't really need it. You're not trying to create any depth of field here. I think what you really need is a tripod and be able to set it up, and that way you will be able to shoot even scene like this without lowering your f-stop and without bringing up your ISO. ISO 400, just as a reminder, anytime you work with ISO, anything above 100 will introduce additional digital noise in the image, which is exactly what we're looking at here. And depending on the type of camera and quality of your gear, the noise will be bigger or smaller. Some of it can be removed in a Lightroom or Photoshop, or you can remove it with additional plugins like Topaz, but there will come point with the noise where it's just not removable. So just something to keep an eye on. When it comes to composition, absolutely love this one, and I wouldn't change anything on it. I think it really works. Again, I'm a big fan of forest and woodland photography in combination with the water, in combination with the path and glow, with the natural frame created here. I think you really spot on here, Bradford. On this one, I think the thing that it's tilting is a little bit of a problem. Let's see if we can adjust it here. Basically, going for something like this would be more appropriate. So then you're getting at least straight horizon to start to work with it. And then you could really kind of see and look at the image and starting to kind of say what is it what needs to be in the scene, so that actually adds something to the scene, and what is it doesn't need to be there. So I think, for example, this whole front part doesn't really need to be there in the image because it doesn't give anything to the view. I think the most important and nicest part is your sky, and then this part here where you see the reflection and there are some nice rocks and birds. So you could simply next time frame it just a little bit differently, maybe more something like this. You could be going for the 16:19 panoramic view and maybe more focusing on what's happening here. So there is so much more happening on your scene, and that's the way I would be looking at it as the composition. You get your nice foreground, middle ground, and background with the sky, and there we have something to work with. Talking about post-processing. So this one, not much. Let's see your light, let's see your whites. Everything is exposed well. I think the color is quite natural. Let's have a look if we would hit the auto here. Obviously, it brings us a little bit down, which is normal in Lightroom, and I would keep it this way. I quite like the purple tint you have on it. I think it looks really cool. Brightness, let's see if we would exposure. Again, it overexpose it as usual, maybe just a little bit, but other than that, what you could do, you could kind of mask a little bit the foreground just to hide it by using the linear gradient, and maybe just bring down the exposure to do something like this to really keep a focus on the window. So you can add another mask and use the radial gradient, and maybe just add a little bit of exposure with a little bit of warmth there, so it even more kind of bring out the kind of tunnel view. But that's about it. Otherwise, this picture is perfect. On this one, I think I would really, first of all, I would be looking at how I can remove some of the noise. So that would be in your kind of editing panel, looking at details and looking at noise reduction. Some of it does get removed, but not as much. Color noise reduction we could also do a little bit, and that's about it here. In the optics, I would be looking again at the remove chromatic aberration. It does remove a little bit of it, but once you get so much like this, here again around the stone and here a little bit, you really need to look at the different ways to remove it. And as I say, I'm planning a video on it in the next few days, so if it's going to be ready, I'll put it under the description or leave it in the comments for you. The colors are really nice on both of them. I'm really happy with it, Bradford, so thank you very much for sharing the photos with you. Well done. Make sure you keep shooting. And one thing I would suggest you, if I would have to take everything out of it, I would go for a tripod and make it easy for me, make the framing easy, set it up. Start with 100 ISO. When you're shooting images like this, go for like f7, 8, 9, 10, 11, stay in these brackets, and then let the shutter speed be whatever it needs to be, and you will be just fine. Bradford, thank you, take care, and I hope to see more of your images in the future. Moving to the next photographer, Caroline. Caroline, we have 2 images from you this week. So let's have a look at them. Starting with the first impression. Interesting scene. Now, I really like this circle wheel there. However, I wish there is more of it in the view. I am not the big fan of cutting items off. I think it's confusing. For you as somebody who was standing there, it's clear what it was. For us as a viewers, I think it gets a little bit confusing. Why it's there, what it is actually. Sometimes it can work because it creates a little bit of a mystery for a viewer, but in this case, I think it would have been nicer if it would be there. Or the next thing I would do, I would actually do 2 steps forward, avoid the circle altogether, and just focus on this really cool looking tree. So that would be just my first impression here. On this one, absolutely love it. I just think, again, just as a reminder for everybody, stay away for adding white frames to your images. I'm not sure why is it there. On some parts it's not there, and it really takes attention away from the image, simply because human eye, again, just like say pretty much every week, human eye gets focused first by the brightest and whitest spots on the image. So when I look at this picture, first my eye goes around the image, looking at the frame. Then I start to notice that it's actually not on some parts of the image. So right away, my attention is away from what I'm seeing, which actually, if I just zoom in a little bit, the whole image, and I don't worry about the frame. So let's say we do something like this. I actually really like. I think that's a very, very nice, simple, clean composition and beautiful image. So let's talk about it. First, starting with this image, looking at your settings, using your Canon, ISO 100, spot on, 16 millimeters, great. So very, very wide lens. F10 is perfect. And then you on 1/20th of a second. So I'm assuming you're using a tripod, which is great, and I'm really happy with the settings. I think that's the settings I use most of the time. ISO 100, absolutely nothing goes over that. I've always start from 7.1 till 11, and I play around with it. Depends on how much I have in a scene and how worried I am with things being blurry and so on. And then I leave the shutter speed as that last, and I adjust it based on what I need. That's my most simple setting. Of course, different scenes require different things, but I think you spot on there. So well done. Everything is sharp. I'm happy with it. I don't see any noise, which is great. Shame for the quality of the picture, because when I zoom in, as you can see, I'm starting to get the pixels. But other than that, nice diffused light, and really, really cool picture. Caroline, nothing to add to it. On this one, we have settings again. Again, you spot on there, ISO 100, f11, 3/10 of a second. Perfect. Now, this one is one of the times when maybe you could have gone for lower f-stop. So if you would have gone for, let's say, 6, 5.4, then you would maybe get blur at the back of the image. But that's more artistic decision rather than anything wrong with your technical skill on the image. Caroline, I have to say, both the image, I'm very impressed with the technical part. Absolutely nothing wrong. I can see here again, lovely diffuse light, great time of the day, and great scene. Talking about composition, this one is spot on. I would cut a little bit of the canapé up here. I think it's, again, talking about how much to leave there and how much of it is important for the actually storytelling for the main subject, where I think this part, for example, isn't as important. So if you would have gone at the end for something like this, I think it would have been more than enough. It's almost a question if maybe even something like this wouldn't be enough. You really want to have the tunnel in the center, and then you get completely different picture and something a little bit different, but again, more kind of artistic decision. It's just a kind of advice when it comes to composition. I think to leaving all the top, yeah, it just doesn't really add. If there would be some kind of interesting line going through, maybe, but other than that, nothing I can add, Caroline. I think it's very, very lovely. Love the leading line, love the flow through. Brilliant. Talking about this one, yeah, so the tree is great. This is very interesting because it adds texture. Next time, make sure that you include it all in the image. Now, I used to kind of cut things up as well, and then I wasn't sure. And now what I do, for example, when I'm even taking pictures of like a house or a tree, I always take at least 1 or 2 images where I have lots of extra around it. So let's say I would take a picture with this wheel as well, and I would maybe crop it later to the image like you have. But To start with, I have all the data, I have the whole view, and then I can zoom in the actual computer. So that way, I don't have to go back to the same location. And once you learn to do that, you will be always fine and you will have more to work with. So as I said on the beginning, I would just repeat myself, either incorporate the whole thing in, so it can really work like a full-time work, like a foreground element, or cut it off and really focus just on the tree. That's about it. Other than that, I think the tree is standing there nice. I think the around works very, very well, and I think it's lovely in overall. Post-processing, I think it's quite clean. You could do a little bit of noise removal here. Other than that, let's see your white balance. And that doesn't really help us much. I don't think there is really anything wrong. You are heavily on green and this kind of dark green, which is a style in some way. You could do a little bit more of contrast and just make it a little bit less flat, so that way you add more kind of texture to it. Let's see with your blacks and maybe a little bit of a whites. And yeah, that's about it. I think it's looking cool. I'm really happy with the image. I think black and white would be also very interesting, but it's fine like this as well. Nothing much I can add. On this one, I think it's really cool. Very natural edit, which I'm really happy with. Let's have a look at your white balance again. So I think you were fine. I think you're going you're going a lot for the yellows. Maybe a little bit of a purple would help as well, just a touch. And then you could just maybe do a little bit of a masking with radial gradient and maybe add a little bit more attention towards the actual tunnel, but that's about it. Other than that, what you could do is you could close the image a little bit more with maybe something like this and create it and add another one from the bottom. Something like this. So again, I'm just adding attention to the actual tunnel view and just playing around with it. Other than that, Caroline, thank you so much for sharing your image with us. It's been great to see them again, and I hope to see more pictures from you again. By the way, I was really impressed by the technical part, really impressed about how you think about your photo. Well done. Moving on next, Dainis, we have 2 pictures from you. I'm sorry if I can pronounce your name right. Some of them are a little bit foreign for me, but I will try my best. Talking about 2 images here, and let's look at the first impression. So this one is quite interesting. It's kind of church, and partially it's working. I think I look at it and my head almost go immediately up, and I think it's to do with the cutting of these parts of the image down here. Something we'll look at it in a moment. On this one, it's an interesting close-up, and nothing wrong about that, other than the fact that you have a straight blue sky, which come across quite boring for photography, but that's how it is. And what more is you getting a really harsh, strong shadows. So I'm assuming this was captured like midday or maybe in a summer later on, just something to kind of keep an eye on. You're looking for more diffused light, but sometimes we can't be at the right location all the time. It's just kind of thing that strikes me right away. Talking about technical part of your image, we don't really have much details here. It says that it's Nikon D800, ISO 100. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look if we can see any of the sharpness. Maybe it looks sharp to me. Obviously, when I zoom in really heavily, I kind of start to see more pixels than anything else, but it looks sharp. The exposure is interesting. I think kind of looking at the image, there may be been done some sky replacement. You can notice this mostly here on the kind of part of the top of the church. As you can see, the kind of sky is starting to like a transfer through, which is a little bit of a shame. Let's see. The rest of the image seems to be fine. And don't take me wrong, I have absolutely nothing wrong with the sky replacements. You can see a little bit here as well. But it just needs to be done right. I always start by looking at the image, the way I capture it. I look at the sky. And for example, if I get a picture where there is a gray sky, I go and look for an interesting gray sky and replace it with a gray sky. I would never take a midday gray sky picture and try to make it look like a sunset, for example, because it will never work. It's not just the sky itself, it's the overall white balance, it's the way the light shows. So just as a suggestion for next time. Technically, other than that, everything is sharp. I think the light is nice and diffused. It's an interesting scene. I don't see much wrong here. Technically, here again, everything sharp. There are no kind of photographic details here. I think the picture, the time of the day isn't perfect. I already mentioned that, so let's leave it. Moving on to composition. I get your idea to put the whole church in it. I think what's taking a little bit of the attention away are these cars. Either Photoshop them away, which shouldn't really be that difficult in these parts, or maybe just don't include them, maybe go more further. I understand this was already a really wide shot, so just something for the future. It's really tricky to photograph these kind of places in the middle of the town because it gets kind of crowded. If you would leave the car there, what I would do, I would rather have the full car there so the viewer isn't confused. This is something what we call confusing foreground element, and it's basically things like cars, people, trees, buildings, lampposts. When they are just appear at the elements like this and they just don't kind of belong there, they are a little bit confusing, and this is an example of it. You're getting like just a really small part of the car, and that's a little bit of a shame. Other than in composition, I think the church is there nicely. There is not much more obstruction on it, so it's very interesting, but this is something to talk about. This is definitely for me like a picture from a series of the images. So I'm imagining I'm coming from the windmill. I have a nice landscape shot of the windmill. Then I come a little bit closer. Maybe I get my portrait view of the whole windmill, including the full thing. And then I go and I zoom in and get the view like this. So as a part of these three pictures, this picture works great. As a single standalone of a picture, not really, because it's not really telling the full story. It's like, imagine you take a middle of a book, which is very specific about the story, and you read it to somebody, and the person has absolutely no clue what you're talking about because they didn't see the before and after, just to give you an idea. Other than that, I would just keep an eye on my visual balance. As you can see, the whole thing is leaning a little bit towards one side. So next time, try to position yourself more so it's kind of straight up. Or if not, go even more in, and that way you make the viewer aware that it was your intention. Talking about post-processing, keep an eye on the sky replacement so it's not visible anywhere in the sky and stuff. Other than that, your white balance is just a touch off, I think. So when we go to auto, you see when we go to auto, it actually helps. It creates it a little bit more pleasing. So let's see before. You see green is sneaking in into some parts of your image. So let's remove this. You get lots of green in these areas, and you get lots of yellows in the areas where they don't need to be yellow, like this building right here. So when we go for the auto, it really helps. And also like when it kind of makes the top of the image a little bit bluer, then the warmth which is in this part of the image becoming a little bit more local, and it's a little bit more natural than if you push it towards the whole image. Anyway, Dainis, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It was a pleasure to review them, and make sure you send us more pictures in the future. And if you have a time, make sure you join us at the Clever Photographer Academy, our new Facebook group. On Facebook, obviously, just go ahead, search for us, come and join us. We talk all things photography there, and we would love to see more pictures from you there. Moving on, the fifth photographer, Fotini. Here we are. Let's have a look at your images. Two images again. Landscape right here with a little bit of a long exposure in black and white, and then landscape here with lots of long exposure, some sun. First impression, there are parts which are, I think, way too blurry. You're getting a little bit of sensor dust here, which is kind of visible. So that would be just the first thing. Looking at this one, again, sensor does here, so obviously your camera will have something on it here. Now, there is a way to remove it. I will leave a video under in the description to show you how it can be done, but it's really super simple. There is just a spot removal tool here. I can click on visualize spots and see if it's going to show it to us. It doesn't, so that's fine because you can really see it. Make the brush bigger and just hit it, and that's it. So now when I go out, it's gone. And on this one, similarly, you just go to visual, spot removal, make this thing a little bit smaller, and voila, it's gone. So talking about technical point of view, let's look at the settings. Canon, ISO 200, f16, 5 seconds. So my question would be, let's have a look at this part. This is still sharp-ish. You're getting something kind of leaking through here. This is way too blurry, which obviously it will be blurry with a long exposure, I think, but I think it's a lot. And that's about it here. So technically, I think it's a little bit underexposed in this part of the image. Let's have a look at your light. Whites are good. Blacks are heavy here. You see on the stones. So I'm here in the light on the editing panel. I hit the blacks with my mouse and then I hold Option or Alt, and you can see anything what's not white. It's really heavily black. Now you can go for a little bit. Let's say if I really push the highlights and open the shadows. As you can see, regardless where I go with the black, these parts are just burned. The data are gone from it. Nothing we can do about it there. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. Technically, so underexposed here, sensor does here, just something to keep an eye on. I'm not sure about the, what else, where we were on setting. ISO 200. I think for this shutter speed, you would have to be on a tripod. So then always go for 100. You will keep all the noise away and you don't have to worry about it. Really, when it's a scene like this, when it's so bright, I think ISO 100 is the way to go. F16, I wonder maybe it was to kind of push the f-stop, push the shutter speed to get it longer, but I usually try to rather go for an ND filter. I know sometimes it leaves a tint and everything, but that way you don't have to go for the high f-stop and you get the sensor dust coming out. But that's not the biggest problem. I think the sharpness, you get the heavy sharpness on the sand and then everything goes away. I think when the boat gets so much blurry like this, I would just look for a scene where the boat maybe wouldn't be there. Talking about this image, talking about technical point of view, we are talking ISO 200. Again, I would just go for 100. F11 I think is perfectly fine here. It's a kind of deep image with lots of elements in front and at the back, so I think F11 is a great choice. And 2.5 second is where it gets this kind of almost like a fog looking effect, and I think it looks really cool. So for two of them, I think this one is much more cleaner and visually more appealing. This one is a little bit confusing because there is a lot happening on the scene. That brings us nicely to the composition. You get this foreground element, which is nice yellow and full of texture. And then you have lots of these dark areas with note sharp areas, again with lots of darkness here, and then the boat. So I'm not 100% sure what I would do here. I would probably try to see how I can position myself a little bit differently in the future. I think this is very interesting. It creates kind of interesting flow through the image. The white works quite well here. So it creates some kind of balance. Shame that there is no more texture in the sky, which would really help. But other than that, I think composition-wise, Fotini, it's quite all right. Talking about post-processing, I would start by looking at how I can kind of sort the white balance here. Let's have a look on the color and white balance. Yeah, it doesn't really help us too much. Yes, you're getting lots of green, probably from the sea in, but other than that, I would just try to reshoot this image. Definitely look to remove the spots. And as you have some parts already burned, as you can see in the blacks, it's a bit difficult to work with it in the future. Where this one, I think is pretty cool. What I would do is I would add another mask on the top of the actual scene here and bring down the exposure to create a little kind of gradient here. So since we don't have a texture there, this will help us a little bit to create a gradient there. Again, same thing, I would do it here at the bottom, just to make sure that we bring the attention really to where it should be. And for this we can use brush, and let's have a look, just somewhere like this. make it a little bigger and really play around with all of this. Other than that, Fotini, it's great. Thank you very much for sending us your photos. The long exposure is a tricky thing, especially at the seaside. It takes lots of time, lots of practice, and so many times I go out, I spend the day at the beach, and I come back with 3-4 photos. That's just the way it is. You cannot plan nature, even though we would love to, but good efforts, and I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. So it's time to look at another photographer, Greg Kelton. Greg, 2 pictures from you, and once again we have the trains back. Like I told you last time, I'm a huge fan of train photography, and you're really good at it. So let's have a look at your pictures this week. This one with a nice close-up with lots of steam coming out, a really nice close-up of the machine, brilliant. And then this one with the lady on a tractor, a really lovely composition with the heavy steam again coming out. Talking about the first impression, I think we need to look at a little bit of the white balance on this one, and for some reason you're also getting lots of noise coming out, specifically when I look at the lady and so on. So just something to look at. On this one, I really like it. Maybe a little bit more contrast. Keep an eye on our exposure, but we'll talk about it in a second. Let's have a look at them. Let's have a look at your settings. First of all, Nikon D5300, which was one of my first cameras, so I know myself that you can create some incredible images with this camera. You're using 70-200, perfect. So your ISO 200, f8, 1/100th of a second. Just as always, you know that obviously anytime you go above the 100 ISO, you start to create and add additional digital noise to the image. Obviously, depending on the camera and the gear, you can get some of them add a lot, some of them can handle more. Just something to keep an eye on. Obviously, talking about moving subject, you need the f-stop, the shutter speed to be at certain speed, so I completely understand that. I think the f8 works really well here, so nothing much I can add here. Keep an eye on the exposure, and I think that's to do also with the time of the day. I understand that the train like this is going only at certain times of the day. However, you get a lots of kind of bright areas around. So let's just quickly jump here and look at your whites. And when I hit the whites and I keep holding Option or Alt, you can see all the white bits, and that's basically parts. Anything what's not black is overexposed and burned out, and it's starting to lose a detail in on the image. Now, when we talk about the light, that's quite often overexposed, and that's not a big deal, but you're starting to get the same effect in other parts of the image, specifically down here. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. So other than that, I think talking about a little bit of the blur in the steam, I think it works quite well. The machine is sharp all the way through. Yes, you're getting touch of noise in the kind of darker areas, which is normal, but other than that, good. Talking about this one, let's have a look at the settings. And again, same camera, ISO 400, f5.6, 1/640th of a second. So we get the sharpness all the way through, including the lady, which for f5.6 is good. You're getting a little bit of the blur at the end, which is more the kind of depth of field, which works quite well. Now, the problem is already with camera like this, when you're on 400, you're starting to introduce so much noise that the images or the edges of some of the items starting to look almost blurry. Specifically, you can see it on the lady itself. So there is a lot of effort and thought going into the composition, which I think is super great, but it's just a shame that you're starting to lose a little bit of the details here. Other than that, nice diffused light. For me, better than here. Sharpness is there again, and other than that, I'm happy technically speaking. Composition on this one, it's a nice kind of crop tight shot of the train. I think it works quite well. Just keep an eye on making sure that your image is kind of straight. It can be done here in geometry quite often. Let's see if maybe auto would help us a little bit. Yeah, just a touch, just to make sure that we kind of keep everything nice and straight and visually more natural for the viewer. Other than that, composition, you could go a little bit further. Obviously, for me, this would be image, which would be more kind of part of the series. I would have a 2-3 images, one looking at the whole train, one coming a little closer, and then bam, I have this one. So really kind of storytelling journey for the viewers, and I think it works very, very well, this one. Composition, this one is perfect, really thought through, excellent. If you, one thing you could wish for the next time is that the actual tractor would be closer to you, so it would be more working as a foreground element. So if it would be somewhere here, I think it would be even cooler. But you know, to put this together, I know you either were very, very lucky or it really worked out well. So I can't say nothing much about this composition. I think it's great. Talking about post-processing, so keeping an eye definitely on the white, on the kind of exposure. That's one thing. Seeing if we use kind of auto, it doesn't bring it. Let's bring it down a little bit. I would add a little bit of a contrast, and definitely keeping an eye on your white balance on this one. You see it adds a little bit of the yellow, a little bit of the tint, kind of before and after. There is a little bit of a blue tint coming in. Geometry we already talked about, so just kind of keeping an eye, making sure that everything is straight. And one thing I would probably do is I would add a little bit of a vignette just to close the picture and really bring the focus towards the train. Now this picture would look great as black and white as well. Obviously you could turn it to black and white and then really work with it, maybe making the background even more kind of darker, and then really work on the train itself with the masking and maybe a brush. And then you can kind of do a little bit of dodge and burn, so making some part of the image a little bit brighter. So something like this. And obviously some of the steam, and then create another one for the burn where you basically make some parts darker to do something like this. Maybe not as much, and then pushing the contrast and maybe even a little bit of the clarity, and you get something like this, which would be also interesting. It's more as an artistic example and another way, another thing what you could do with your image. But I still love it. Well done on this one. On this one, same thing. Keeping an eye on your white balance. Going on the auto, just a little bit more yellow and a little bit more tint, I think helps to make it a little bit more natural. I think I would definitely close up a little bit the top, so that can be done by the linear gradient. And bringing down the exposure really brings the attention towards the scene. You could add another gradient at the bottom to similarly close the scene, so to do something like this. And you could again just add a little bit of attention on the train and on the lady itself to do something like this. Other than that, great picture. Always super happy to see the images, Greg. Thank you very much for sending them over to us. It's a joy to review them. I hope to see more of them in the future. Moving on to next photographers. John Lister. John, we have 2 images from you. So let's have a look at them. John, starting with the image number 1, which is a blue hour at city. I think this is great. Love it. Obviously, my wish would be that you would get a little bit more happening on the actual sky to get some more texture, but as a gradient from the golden to blue, I think it's also very cool. I think you captured the city really lovely. I love the kind of star effect on the lights, so well done on this one. Talking about this one, you have the sky seems to be almost kind of burned out. Let's check it out quickly on the white. Not completely, so maybe with the highlights we could bring a little bit out, but there was probably not much happening anyway. So let's talk about it. Technically, starting with this one, let's have a look at the details. Nikon D7-100, ISO 1600. Woof, that's brave. Let's have a look if we have lots of noise. And not really that much. I'm very impressed what the camera can do with such a high ISO. Obviously, f5.6, 1/5 of the second. It's not the settings I would use technically. I would be definitely going for tripod if I could. leaving my ISO as lower as I could, depending on the camera gear. 100, 200, 400, 600 would be where I would stick. For scenes like this, definitely going for F11, F9, F8, depending. I would go for F11. If I would want to have more of these stars, I would go for like F12, 16 and get a lot of it coming out, and then leave the f-stop based on what it needs to be on the camera. With a tripod, you don't need to worry about it that much. Obviously, with 1/5 of the second, you get these people in a sharp and focus, but really out of the whole image, this little part is not gonna really make a huge difference because the main impact is the city. So that would be just a tip for the technical settings. On this one, 28mm f16, 1/6 of the second. There is no ISO. When I zoom in, it's a shame that I don't get much of information on the... obviously, this part of the image I like. The white really takes lots of attention away. And John, as I always mention, as a viewer, your eyes get first attracted by the brightest and the whitest spot on the image, and that's your sky. So regardless what's happening here, your eyes will always go there and they will get overwhelmed, and then it's really tricky to start to look at it. Where I think composition-wise, it kind of works. You have the stream and the waterfall, just something else would have to be happening here. Talking about composition, I think this one is spot on. Nothing I would add to it. I think it's well done. You have the leading line with the river. You have the buildings, the golden at the back, the really nice light. I would add nothing to it. Maybe keep an eye on geometry. That's just one thing. I wonder if we would go to geometry down here and use auto. It would help us just a little bit. It would just make sure that everything is nice and straight. Talking about this one, composition, if I don't think about the sky, which is completely white, I think it kind of works. Again, I would look at the geometry, make sure everything is straight. I think this works a little bit better. I think the streak leading me towards the waterfall works quite well. This actually creates a really nice frame, which again works. So in overall, John, very lovely photo. Composition wise, I think a part of this, not bad at all. Talking about post-processing, this one spot on. I think I'm speechless about this one. I don't have anything to add. I think it's great. Yeah, you could obviously add another mask and another radial gradient to the horizon and maybe add a little bit more of the yellow and pink and so on, but we would be just talking minor details. Well done on that, John. On this one, not sure. I don't know. Let's see if we would turn it to black and white. Would it help us? Maybe a little bit, but not greatly. Again, we could use our masking tool here. So we would maybe use the radial gradient, position it here, and then really invert it. And what we would do is we would basically do like vignette, but we would position the vignette where we want it. And then we can use some brush right here and add a little bit of brightness to the fall. So that way we really bring in attention towards the white areas. Again, we can make brighter the streak. So that works quite well as well. And we can do some kind of more dodge to make some areas kind of brighter. Maybe something like this. And some darker, so we can create another one, another brush, and bring the exposure down and just kind of work it out this way. I mean, this picture with the white of this, and I don't know if it's your thing, John, or no, but you could do sky replacement really easily on this. It's a pure white background. You could really easily place a sky there, and suddenly you would get a whole different image here. But in overall, John, I think it's super cool. Keep an eye on your white balance because it's getting a little bit more on the green side. I think if you would push the tint just a little bit, it would be helpful. Maybe a little bit of the yellow would help as well. Other than that, well done. John, I hope to see more of your pictures next week. Until then, take care. Moving on the next photographer, Kevin. Kevin, we have 2 images from you. So let's talk about them. Kevin, first impression. Really tight shot. Probably a little bit too tight for me. I completely get what you're trying to do. The frame around is very interesting. But I think there should be a little bit more of the house there for me to really buy into the full idea. I don't know if you have done some sky replacement or not. I think it's gonna work. You see, you have a little bit of a kind of bright glow around the actual trees, which is a little bit unnatural for me there. Other than that, it's interesting. On this one, so you're getting this kind of sky replacement here. Let's see. I think, personally, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like you've done some sky replacement here. Maybe not, if you got this sky, perfect. It's kind of, again, similar kind of scene. I get what you're trying to do. Obviously, the trees as a foreground work quite nicely, but then this get really obstructed, and I wonder if it's enough for it to really tell the story you're trying to do. Talking about technical point of view, let's have a look if we have some details. So you're using Olympus, ISO 500, 35mm lens, f7.1, and 1/20th of a second. F7.1 for scene like this is great. Obviously, the basic kind of landscape, 7.1 to f11 is the starting setup. I would go for 1/20th of a second. It's just about on the edge of what you can hold. So obviously it was a kind of low lighting situation. Definitely try to see if you can get a tripod. If you did have a tripod, then I would be looking at bringing down the ISO, simply because anytime you're over 100, you're starting to add and introduce more additional digital noise, which is a shame, as obviously you don't want to do that unless it's your kind of artistic decision. So that's when we zoom in. When you have this high ISO and the noise starting to come out, things are sharp. However, they're starting to be a little bit soft on the edges by look. So you can see it specifically on this part, rather than being super sharp and super detailed, they're starting to kind of blur together, things starting to kind of match. And when you look at all the way back, it's just kind of little pixels. So something to keep an eye on. Interesting light, sharpness I talked about, settings I talked about. On this one, ISO 200, so better choice there. F7.1, I think you're good there. 1250th of a second is super fast. So I don't know if it was needed for this scene or not. It looks like it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so it shouldn't really. What I think is confusing is that talking about sky replacement, you have a sun setting behind the clouds here, where looking at the bottom, it looks like the sun was actually shining from here. So obviously that naturally doesn't look right. These buildings should be dark and they should be illuminated from behind, rather than getting the sun from here and then seeing the sun above them. So definitely something to look at. Talking about composition, I think the scene is way too busy. Judging the main subject is supposed to be the house, but just kind of keep an eye. Also keep an eye on these really dark edges. Let's look at the settings here just quickly. Looking at the blacks, you see when I go to the light and when I hit Option or Alt on your keyboard and I click on blacks, everything what's black is basically black, and there is no data in it. If I go all the way the other way around and trying to save it, it doesn't come out. So basically there's not much more you can do with this image. Keep an eye on the exposure. I know we always say to underexpose the image, but don't do that to the point when you start to lose the detail. Composition, back to the composition, I think it's a lovely idea. I think if there wouldn't be this tree here and you would get a little bit more of the house, it would be a little bit more interesting, Kevin. But other than that, I like the idea. I know what you're trying to do, but look for a little bit more simplicity. On this one, very much similarly, nice idea with the trees. Although this big tree makes the scene a little bit unbalanced, obviously talking about the balance of the composition, it would be leading towards this side because there is much more happening here in this area. But other than that, again, lovely idea, but start by looking at more kind of simple views. Maybe one tree, maybe few trees, maybe a bushes, but not this whole complex where this kind of disappear. Then your sky starting to be the main subject, and then by looking down and you can right away say that the sky wasn't actually like this. So just keep an eye on. Post-processing, let's have a look. I think it's a little bit underexposed here. I wouldn't go as high, but maybe something like this. Let's have a look at your white balance. Going for the auto. I would probably go somewhere here. and that would be it. I would open up the shadows a little bit more just to try to get reduce of some of the darkness. I think the darkness is super heavy, and that's about it. On this one, definitely look at your white balance. I think it's way too yellow. So not that much, but maybe something here, and maybe sticking to something like this here would be what I would do. Keep an eye on the noise on the sky and the noise on the actual image itself. And that's about it. Post-processing wise, yeah, also keep an eye when you do the sky replacements on the glow around the trees, as it's really tricky to do it, and sometimes it introduces areas where they are more visible. On this here, again, you have this kind of white glow around the branches, which is not very natural. Kevin, anyway, thank you very much for sharing your photo with us. It was a joy to review them, and I hope to see more of them in the future. Moving on, the next one, we have Marta. Marta was our photographer of the week last week, and with her woodland and forest photos, we were super excited to see them and welcome her to our Hall of Fame here at Clever Photographer. So she sent us 2 pictures this week. Marta, just as a reminder for next time, again, same goes for everybody. When you send us a picture, and in fact to any reviews in the future, try to stay away from using frames and any kind of watermarks, signatures, because really what we want to look at is your own photos. We don't want to be judging any frames or anything like that. So for this week, I'm just gonna take it off if it's okay, and focused on the actual image itself. Other than that, let's look at your photos. So this one is very interesting. It's kind of a little bit different style than what I've seen from you so far. And to some degree it works. I really like what you've done cleverly. I'm assuming the sky wasn't really that interested here, so it's a little bit overexposed. Maybe there was a little bit of a fog. And if the bottom would have stayed the way it was, it would probably not look that good. But as you added this kind of white part and white elements, it actually really works. Now, I would do the cropping a little bit differently, but other than that, I think it's a very interesting idea. Now, obviously we get some mushrooms. I would like it to be a little bit cleaner. I know that the nature doesn't work like that, but maybe without this grass, I would maybe crop it a little bit differently to make sure that the mushroom, which is the main thing, is more in the center, but still interesting. I like what you kind of done with the colors, that you turn it to something else. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about it. So starting about this image, let's see. So Nikon D5600, ISO 100, perfect. f-stop 7.1, perfect. 1/400 of a second. Obviously, if you would have an ND filter tripod, you could have done little long exposure, but it started to be a little bit complicated. Then you maybe birds would be blurry. But other than that, the setting is spot on for landscape photography. So well done there. These areas are sharp, so that all works. Again, if you could send the pictures in a little bit higher resolution so we can see a little bit more, that would help. The light is interesting, and we already talked about the top and bottom, so no more to talk about there. Now, talking about the mushroom photo, everything is sharp. Let's have a look at your setting. ISO 50, so this was a mobile phone capture. f1.8, 1/80th of a second. Interesting, obviously heavy vignette. It's interesting, you know, it's like into the series of forest and woodlands. It would really fit in, so I have not much to say about the image. Everything is sharp and it looks cool. Talking about composition, definitely on this one, I would crop more of the top. So let's see if we can unlock this and just go to something like this. I think that looks way cooler. I would maybe even crop a little bit of the side. And again, the cropping goes, you include whatever add visually something to the actual scene. You crop away or take away or frame away, whatever doesn't. I think this looks much cooler. I think taking away the white part, which doesn't really give us anything, helps because we minimize parts of it, and then it looks much more balanced. Also, when it comes to the actual reflection, it always looks really cool when it's more closer to the actual center of the image, because visually it's much more balanced that way. Composition on this one, I would have make sure that the mushrooms are more in the center because they are the main players. And I would probably crop top and bottom as well because we really focus just on them. Other than that, nothing really to add here. Post-processing, I think this one was very cleverly done and I don't have anything to add to it. I think it's super cool. Everything is nice. It's obviously different white balance, so it's kind of more artistic approach than maybe from your other images, but I think it kind of works, Marta, so well done on that one. Similarly on this one, the heavy vignette kind of works in this case. Obviously, yeah, again, you could maybe try to see if you could remove some parts of the kind of leaves to have the mushrooms a little bit cleaner, but then that's a nature and that's how it was. So in overall, Marta, thank you very much. I hope to see more of your pictures in the future, and until then, take care. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Patrick. Patrick, we have 2 pictures from you. Patrick Atlas. So let's jump into it. Talking about picture number 1, which is a stunning sky, beautiful golden color, beautiful kind of lamppost, but it's heavily tilting. So Patrick, I think that's a shame right here. On this one, this looks like Paris. Let's have a look if we have information. Using the Orsay, yes, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sunset, beautiful colors. So let's jump straight into it. Starting with this image, looking at your settings, ISO 100, spot on, f16, yes. If you were going for some kind of star lamp on the lamppost, it didn't really work out here, but it's fine. 1/30th of a second. Obviously, you probably were still able to hold your camera, so handheld. And in overall, it's cool. Yeah, things are sharp. There is no noise. It's very interesting light. Obviously, the sky is full on, so it's very interesting. And technically, I think it's well captured. Talking about this one, ISO 100, f6.3, 3/5 of the second. Now, I wonder why you went for 6.3 f-stop. Unless it was handheld again, because ISO 100 is spot on, definitely the main goal for all of us as a landscape cityscape photographers. But I think for a scene like this, I would be going more for a f-stop, f11, f9, and then I know the shutter speed would have to be slower, but maybe you would get a little bit more smooth on the actual picture. Now, talking about composition, talking about technical parts still, some parts seems to be a little bit burned out. So let's have a look. If we go into the light and whites and I hold here. Now you can see anything what's not black is basically a little bit overexposed. It's mostly the lamppost, so it's not a big deal. But when I really zoom in, you can see how they are really, really burned out. So just something to keep an eye on in the future. Moving on to post-processing, so definitely geometry on this one. Let's see upright and use the auto. Definitely I would be going on something like this, but then I understand what's happening is you're losing a little bit of the lamppost. So let's have a look if we could crop it a little bit differently. And it's this part where we're losing them. Oh, that's a huge shame. Now, there could be work done with it and so on, but obviously now I understand why the cropping is a bit differently. The problem is that by leaving it that way, obviously it just doesn't look very natural, you know. So you're going for this kind of dreamy, beautiful, warmth-looking picture, and then the first thing everybody's gonna notice is, well, why is it tilting so much? Other than that, I think you a little bit went overboard here with the kind of dodge with the amount of light. I think there's a huge difference between this part and this part, so something to keep an eye on. But other than that, I think it's cool. I really like the edit. Maybe this part is also a little bit too dark, so maybe a little bit of opening of the shadows. Would it help us? Yeah, just slightly, and maybe just on that part. But not a problem. Looking at this one, I think I don't have much to add. I think it's really cool. I think the overall edit, the overall look of the image is cool. Patrick, this is a lovely, lovely image. Thank you so much. And by the way, last time I was trying to look for you because I really like your pictures a few weeks back, and I was trying to get in touch to maybe see if we could put you in the photographer of the week, but I couldn't find any details for you. So if you watch this video, make sure you email us at info@cleverphotographer.com, so that way in the future we can get in touch with you and maybe we can showcase some of your work. Moving on, the next photographer, Paul Reconcete. Paul, I have had 2 images from you, I believe, and I understand that one of them is maybe a raw file, and one of them is a smart preview. Okay, so let's look at this one. So maybe this is a raw file, definitely. This is the after. This is JPEG. And this is JPEG as well. Cool. Let's talk about it. So anyway, let's focus on this one right now. Obviously, this is a before, and I always like to look at what you actually came out with. I'm not really that interested about how it looked originally. I know lots of people do. They want to see the negatives, but I want to see what you end up with as a photographer. So talking about this one, first impression, stunning epic scene with a heavy, heavy sun coming through, coming out on the actual river with the boat there and a kind of shadow silhouette look. Brilliant, Paul. Well done on that. Talking about this one, it's almost like some kind of little lake or little water area on the mountains. When we put 2 of these pictures next to each other, this one is obviously so much more epic. This one is still very interesting, but I'm not 100% sure about the crop. When I look at it, it's kind of, I'm having a little bit of the mountain, but not too much. There's a little bit of smoke. So next to 2 of them, that one is a little bit more interesting, but still we're going to look at them both. So talking about this one, you're using Nikon D5600, ISO 1600, depending what you were trying to do. Just as a reminder, anytime you go above 100, obviously you starting to introduce a digital noise to the image, and you don't want to do, you want to try to do that as little as possible. F16 works for me, 1/500th of a second. Again, if you were trying to make sure that the guy is still and that sharp, then it worked quite well here. Now noise wise, yeah, there is some noise on the sky. The dark areas, the silhouette you can't really see, so it's not a big problem. Talking about this image, ISO 100, perfect. F11, great, and 1/5 of 500 of a second, so that's why we can see some of the steam. So well done on that. So really technically nothing to add on this one. Composition wise, I think this works really well. I think for me personally, there are some parts which don't really add anything to the whole composition, so it could have been a little bit more cropped. For example, making sure that I have the sun of my third and then cropping a little bit of it away here would maybe make it just a little bit more pleasing on an eye, but it's more kind of artistic decision. Obviously you could also go a little bit closer and go for something like this, but in overall it's really up to you. Talking about this, other than that, for a composition I wouldn't add anything. I think the silhouette works really well. I think the sun kind of leaning into the water works well, and it's well done. And this one, I just wish there would be a little bit more of a background. I think the foreground, middle ground kind of lean together. It's still interesting. It's kind of like a travel photography, maybe part of a little series where there would be the whole area, maybe including the mountain, and then you add this, it would work very well. Just for me, I think maybe the problem, Paul, is that I'm looking at this image as well, so then when you put them next to each other, it's just a little bit tricky. But composition wise, there isn't much wrong. I maybe wish that there would be a little bit more of it here. The main subject is centered, and it's still very nice picture. Talking about post-processing, very natural, really like it. Yeah, I would just maybe add a little bit of the vignette to keep the focus on the actual little lake with the steam. That's about it. Again, as always, keep an eye on the white balance. Definitely not this blue, but maybe a little bit less yellow. Talking about this one, the white balance is spot on. I think the post-processing is very well done here, and you're doing great. So Paul, thank you very much. This is a great image, and I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. So until then, take care, and I hope to see more of your images in one of the next episodes. And it's time to look at the last 4 landscape photographers, starting with Stacy here. We have 2 images from Stacy, so let's jump straight into them. Now, this image, Stacy, reminds me very much the image from Marta a little bit earlier. It's a similar edit and actually something which is very smartly done, so well done on that. So let's have a look quickly. Just a first impression, really like it. I think it works really well. I think the horizon is tilting a little bit on one side, so something to keep an eye on. And I would make the cropping just a little bit tighter to make sure that the reflection is more in the center of the image to make the balance of the composition a little bit different. But we'll talk about that in a second. Talking about this one, a really smart use of the trees to create a little bit of a framing. I would probably crop it a little bit more here as well. Once you're doing it here, I think just to create it again, make it a little bit more balanced would help. Other than that, it's very interesting. Lovely sky, lovely light. So let's jump to it. Starting with this image, looking at the information, can we see anything? We can't, Stacy, so I can't tell you that much. Usually I would get some information about how you capture the picture. Obviously, when I zoom in, I don't see much. I think it's sharp, but as you see, when I zoom in, it really gets really pixelated. So that's a little bit of a shame. Let's have a look at this picture again. No information here, but I can see the sharpness is there. It's very interesting light coming from this side. The depth of the field, it's kind of sharp all the way through. So it's also interesting and kind of well done there. On this one, I think it's kind of sharp all the way through. It's almost like it's early morning or really foggy situation. So still kind of very interesting scene. Talking about composition. So what I would do is first I would check for the actual horizon. So that can be done, for example, here in geometry and going into upright and working with the auto here. So that helped a little bit. Then we can go into the cropping and see if we just need to make sure that we have everything straight here. And I would crop it just a little bit more to make sure that I have the whole line in the middle. So that way it almost creates really like a mirror. It really works and I really, really like it. Now, obviously we can kind of undo this and then push a little bit more of the landscape in if you need to by doing something like this. Maybe I would keep it up to here. That way we get rid of some of the elements here, just kind of a little bit confusing. If I would talk about balance composition, I would probably push it all the way here. So that way we get the kind of similar height of the trees and we get this empty part in the middle. And it kind of work a little bit more. So maybe something like this is what I would do with it, Stacy. That's when it comes to composition. But other than that, I think it's very cool what you captured. And I think it's a smart thing that you captured all of this because then you can really work around it, crop it and adjust it the way you need. Talking about this one, really kind of cool view. I wish there would be a little bit more of the kind of foreground here, that there would be a little bit more of it, so it would kind of fill up a little bit more of the frame. Again, just like I was mentioning a few moments ago, I would probably crop it a little bit more here as well, just a touch, something like this to balance it more. Other than that, it's a lovely kind of frame-in-frame compositions they see, and for me it works, so well done. Talking about post-processing, I'll probably show you exactly what I would do with it. Cropping wise, yes, I would kind of focus more on this part, making sure that my reflection is in the middle, which can be done by doing this. And other than that, I think it's lovely, lovely scene. And this is actually something you could easily print on and put it in a frame. I think it would look really, really cool. So well done on that. Talking about this one, post-processing, just always keep an eye on your white balance. I would probably keep it the way it is. I think there was nothing much wrong with it. Your highlights and shadows are great too. You have a lovely kind of texture in the sky, and overall I think it's a lovely edit with a lovely kind of warm holiday feel, Stacy. So in overall, well done. Lovely 2 features, and Stacy, we hope to see more of them in the future. By the way, if you have a time, if you haven't done yet, make sure you join us at our Clever Photography Academy group on Facebook, where we talk all things photography, we do competitions, and we have a lots of fun with photography there. Moving on, our next photographer, Stevie. Stevie, we have 2 pictures from you, and I would love to review them, but looking at this one, it's so pixelated. Let's have a look at the 60 kilobytes, 400 on 400. It's almost impossible. Let's have a look at the second picture. It's a little bit bigger, but there are some elements here. Stevie, as much as I don't want to do it, I'm going to ask you to send us your picture for next week with a better quality. Please, please. They are both very, very lovely pictures, stunning composition. But when I look at it, it just looks really pixelated to me, and it's really difficult for me to give you feedback on it. Similar on this, lovely view, well captured, but I need a little bit more data. So take your pictures, export them in a higher resolution, upload them again, and I would love to review them for you. Moving on, next we have Toby. Toby, we have 2 images from you, and both of them are actually very, very lovely. So let's check it out. Toby, starting with this one, first impression, beautiful kind of view, create almost kind of really nice depth of field. There's different things happening in different parts of the image. You have this beautiful sky with the sun coming out, hitting the actual rocks, the valley. I think it works very, very well. Talking about this one, much more simple and tranquil scene, but again, it works. Yes, I mean, overall people know that I'm not a big fan of using high frequency texture as your foreground element, but I think for this purpose it works because that's pretty much the only texture on the image. So it adds a little bit of something else into the scene, and then you have the boat in the middle and this kind of very calming water. So overall, I really like them, Toby. Let's jump to it. Let's have a look at the information. We don't have any data from your camera here, which is a little bit of a shame because then it's easier for me to give you some kind of feedback on your settings. Let's zoom in. Obviously, we're getting a little bit of noise, but other than that, everything is nice and sharp. We're getting a really lovely texture in the sky. I think the exposure is well done. I think the light is very lovely, so it also really works. So in overall, well done on that. I don't think technically I could really add anything to it. I think the framing is great. You're getting this really kind of prominent space which gets a lot of light, and it works as far as here, but then it kind of goes over into the sky. So just kind of something to keep an eye on if you had maybe add a little bit of local adjustment to make sure that it's not so visible. That's my only thing. Talking about this one, technically, I think it's very well done. Obviously, sharpness all the way here. Looking at the boat, it's also sharp. There is a little bit of something happening here, but other than that, no noise. So great capture, Toby. Really happy with it. I think technically it's well done. Composition wise, let's have a look at it. Obviously, talking about this one, there is whole different parts happening here with a lovely landscape view and a landscape crop. Obviously, this part of the trees work really well. Then you have the kind of middle ground with the mountains and the sky working as a background. I think it's really cool, Toby. So well done on that. I think this little bit of the grass here is just a little bit of a shame. I wonder if you could have avoided it in some way, but other than that, I think composition is brilliant. On this one, I think the composition works really well. Really nice and strong foreground, middle ground with the water, and then the background with the boat. A little bit of the rocks here and a lovely kind of dreamy sky works great. I wonder if you could have gone a little bit closer and maybe just capture the rocks and maybe use them as a leading line towards the boat. But in overall, I think it's lovely, simple composition which just works. Post-processing, yeah, keep an eye on this. It's really kind of visible. I don't know again if it was there or no, but just something to keep an eye on. Other than that, it's really nice, natural edit, and I don't have much to add, to be honest. I think it just works. In overall, it's super cool. On this one, similarly, just as always, you're kind of wondering if that much of the sky has to be there, if maybe the cropping of 16 or 19 going more on something like this wouldn't be even more powerful, but that's about it, Toby. Other than that, I love your photos. Thank you so much for sending them to us, and I hope to see more of your photos in the future. moving to our final landscape photographer, Yaniv, and he sent us many pictures. Yaniv, we're not able to actually review so many pictures in 1 week. If you have some selected images you would like us to review, make sure you send them for next week. It's 1 or 2 pictures per week, and we'll be happy to review them for you. So let's have a look what we could actually review for you here. I think this one is great, so we look at this one, and let's see. So not this one this week, not this one. We can have a look at this one, not this one, not this one, not this one, and let's look at these 2. Okay, so we have 2 images, so we're gonna jump straight into them. Let's have a look at them. So we have this kind of castle. Let's see if we have any details from the actual image. There is lovely reflection. It's almost a shame that it's not there entirely, but still very interesting. Talking about this one, we have some kind of valley with lots of wood and those balloons. So talking about the first one, looking at your settings, obviously using Nikon D5300, very popular camera, very cool camera. Your settings, ISO 400, f6.3, 1/800 of a second. Try to make sure that your ISO stay as close as 100 as possible, because zooming in you can see lots of noise coming through, and it's definitely something to kind of keep an eye on, because obviously higher ISO than 100 you start to introduce the digital noise in your photos, and it's a little bit of a shame. f6.3 I would be going for somewhere about 7, between 7 and 11. It's the kind of starting point. 1/800 of a second means that you had a lots of space to work with the shutter speed, so just for next time. Technically on this one, ISO, this is a Samsung, so this is a mobile phone picture, so ISO 50, obviously good there, f2.4 and 1250 of the second. The settings on the mobile phone are a little bit different, so I will not really comment on them, other than the fact that it's all sharp. I don't think the balloons were there. Looking at it, either the balloons were not there or the sky wasn't there, so one way or the other, because when you look you can see that the sky is kind of leaking into the actual balloon, so it's just something to kind of keep an eye for future. Talking about this image and composition, I think it kind of works. It's a shame that you don't have more of the reflection in the water, but maybe it wasn't possible. So either way, I think it works. I think it's very tight on the sides, Yaniv. So for next time, I would make a little bit extra space. I think it would help to the overall composition. But other than that, it's actually a lovely, lovely scene, and it's very lovely here. So composition-wise, I quite like it. On this one, I think the composition is very interesting. You get the kind of valley which bring you through. It's really nice flow. You get these balloons, which really works. I think in overall, it's quite nice. Talking about post-processing, so definitely sky replacement here. I think when I look at the tops of the trees, you can see how some of them are kind of disappearing. Also, you can see that this sky doesn't really look like the sky which is reflecting, which I think is super visible. And then you get all of these gray areas around the tree. So just something to work on. I'm all for sky replacement. I have no problem with it, but it really has to be done right for it to work. Also on this image, you can see the sun is coming from this side, the way it's illuminating the subjects, where on this there is not really a sky showing, so just something for a future, Yaniv. Other than that, I think the picture kind of work post-processing wise. I think it's nice, kind of gloomy blue. When it comes to your white balance, I think maybe the tint actually works there, so I think it's quite cool. On this one, post-processing, yes, so I don't know, again, if you have done sky replacement, that is done quite well, but for example, this balloon and this balloon is kind of disappearing there, so something really to kind of work with and make sure that you do it as best as possible so people don't notice it. It's kind of more on the green areas here. Let's see your white balance, if we could help to it. Just a little touch of temperature and tint really help, but in overall, maybe a little bit more cropping to really kind of lead you toward the balloons. So let's see if we would do something, oops, not that much, something like this, and maybe even reduce some of the forest, which is not that important, and you get something like this, and it's even more powerful and strong. And if so, even like this, I think it works quite well. So in overall, lovely 2 captures, few things to work with. Definitely keeping an eye on the sky replacement, making sure that it looks the best possible, and keep shooting, because I can see that you have a really good eye for composition. You have some great ideas, so it's just a training, and keep trying, and you're doing super well. Yaniv, thank you so much for sending us your photos. I hope I can see more of them in the future. And the same goes for all of you guys. If you want to join us for the Clever Photographer photography review show, we do it every week. We review 1 to 2 pictures. And if you want to join us, make sure you head to our website at cleverphotographer.com/review. You can find all the dates, you can find all the links, and you can find all the information there. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next week, keep shooting.